to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast with about 250 reasonable, intelligent, hopeful Christians. All right. Welcome, Laura Hehman.
Thank you, Clark Massey.
We had a listener feedback that was kind of interesting. I'm going to read you a couple lines from it. The person said, I was wondering if you could speak briefly to the upcoming election. I definitely don't align with Harris's campaign as a Catholic, but I also don't like Trump. I'm intrigued by Peter Sonsky, who claims to be running a Catholic campaign. Peter Sonsky is with the American Solidarity Party. Okay, this person has opened a door for us that we had closed. Laura and I are very worried about becoming too negatively political because at the end of the day, have good Sunday dinners, eat donuts and sip coffee after Mass with your friends, build good relationships, thrive, have a great, helpful, hopeful life. And a lot of stuff's going to happen around you that can hurt your economic outlook, can hurt many things, but can also help. But you have to thrive no matter what. Right.
And our hope is in the name of the Lord. And
yes.
Yeah.
And Jesus can walk with us and give us fulfilling, great lives despite any political circumstance. Right. So I think that's why we literally sat down to do a podcast the other week and didn't do it because it was just too rough to talk about current events.
Yeah.
So anyway, this kind of invited us, and we're wondering if we could do a good job with this question without letting it degenerate, kind of just try to get a good perspective on this issue. So how about we talk about kind of the classic problem that this American Solidarity Party, I think, is kind of speaking into. And I think it's kind of a Catholic problem more than a Protestant problem. I have this Protestant buddy who is married to a Catholic, and he's having a hard time going to any evangelical church because the way they're talking about Trump just alienates him completely, because they're kind of treating him as if he is the greatest Christian in the world who's going to run and save, like a cult of personality type thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being maybe a troubled person who might still be the best option, which I think would be a more reasonable view than lionizing him,
Right.
And I don't think Catholics fall into that very much, but we have our own problem. And I think our problem is we love purity tests, and we love we want something perfect to vote for, which is actually not a good political strategy.
It's interesting because it's a great thing about being Catholic is that there's just a plurality of opinions and political ideas that you can have. There's just there are so many things that you can disagree about or have kind of a different style on, and still be Catholic, and it's you're baptized and you go to church on Sundays and you're Catholic, even if and I think that's a great thing about the church. And, this priest can be kind of weird and not to your political tastes and say strange things during the homily, and Jesus still comes, to Mass. So I think it's funny to fall into that trap, because I think Catholicism allows that more than say some evangelical churches take on this sort of character.
Right. And we should, I think it's partly because we have so many things that are kind of categorical. Believe in the Holy Trinity, believe in the Eucharist,
right.
Don't commit murder, don't have an abortion. These are categorical, extremely important, bright line things, right? And we'd love it if our politics was like that too, right? But politics, ever since two tribes met in the wilderness and had to figure something out, has always been a compromise situation. And if you're not willing to do that compromise, you're actually just not going to be political. Right. Which is maybe fine. I mean, we have a whole segment of our society called the Amish who just have receded,
Yeah.
And they seem to be doing OK, Yep.
Yeah.
So I can defend that position, that just don't be political. But if you're going to be political, you're going to get in a mess. And I want to kind of dive into that, both with pro-life issues and everything else, And I think Catholics also are well, compared to all the other churches, we actually have a social doctrine. Our social doctrine does not become a political platform. like when you read the social doctrine, and I've read the compendium, I've read all the major encyclicals on it. It's just, it's much more about defining some common values and talking about valid and invalid values than it is about policy. And so it's kind of almost frustrating, you know?
Yeah. It's dissatisfying.
Right.
I think the first time I looked through the compendium, I was like looking forward to this, prescription for a way of life. And it's not that at all. And you're like, problem could have different solutions at different times or in different communities or in different,
And we had these universities that were mostly Jesuit that kind of specialized in giving people like a social doctrine education,
Mm-hmm.
And social justice was very much a Catholic word until about 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. And it just turns out that like when you look at even those people who really focused on the social doctrine, they didn't end up seeming to be like good workers for the church in the political arena. Mm-hmm. And even the whole concept of social justice got hijacked really quickly by kind of a more Marxian type approach to social justice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it just didn't hold up as a great political, I don't know what you want to call it. It didn't become a political movement that ever became a political party and never made any sense, you know? And that doesn't mean it's useless. It just means that you're asking too much of it when you want it to write your political platform.
Right.
I also think this idea of single issue voters is interesting because I want to kind of expand that idea a little bit. So imagine the biggest single issue for Catholics has been anti-abortion, mm-hmm. pro-life anti-abortion. And if you are for that, then what's your real political goal? Your goal is to decrease abortion or annihilate it either in the near future, in your lifetime, for the next 100 years, as long as you could. You want to decrease and get rid of abortion, right? And what's interesting about that is that's social, that's political, that's a lot of things, right? Like the more friendly we are to kids in our society, the less abortion you have. Also making it politically difficult, the less abortion you have. So it's a multifaceted issue. You also have to think like, if you want to preserve protections for life, do you care about freedom of speech? Like if we lose our freedom of speech, do you think we're going to end up 100 years from now with protections for life?
Mm-hmm.
If we have like lawfare where political opponents of a ruling class end up in jail or end up just getting bogged down and spending all their money getting bankrupted in courts, do you think that our bishops and things are going to speak out on pro-life issues and we're going to have it in 100 years? Right? So you end up with like actually, I think a lot of concerns. Even if you're a single issue abortion person, anti-abortion person, you end up with like a lot of decisions to make about mm-hmm. a couple other issues besides abortion, Well,
even within the issue of abortion, there might be different solutions that you prioritize that are maybe not compatible with each other,
I've seen pro-lifers go to war with each other over one having like a more absolutist position, one being like, yeah, we agree, but we could get this much, we could have 10% less abortions if we just did this,
Yeah, right.
And having that type of tension,
Well, there's that, but also it's like if you want to, like you said, it's like if you want fewer abortions, you might want to focus on building stronger communities, right? Or you might have a focus on, getting your Supreme Court justices on, So it's like even there's a decision to make. How are you going to approach this issue?
And I think, by the way, the great moment in the pro-life movement was the overturn of Roe v. Wade and bringing it back mm-hmm. to the states. But I think for our whole lives, the winning of hearts and minds has been happening, mm-hmm. And I think a lot of great pro-life work was done there, not just in this like political arena mm-hmm. directly.
Yeah.
But the whole point of my point here is not about pro-life. Point of my point here is that even when you have a categorical issue, you end up making pragmatic decisions. Because when we look at all of the politicians, well, there's a group that's extremely pro-life and never compromising. There's also a group that's extremely pro-abortion and really weird, kind of evilly weird, right?
Sorry. What I was trying to say is that even with the same goal, you might approach it in a different way. That's right. That was clear. Okay, right. Sorry.
So yeah, I was going to say, if we just divided politicians into three categories between the wishy-washy and the extreme pro-life and the extreme pro-abortion, there's wishy-washy people in the middle.
Yeah.
I would put Trump in there. I'd put
Yes.
RFK Jr. in the wishy-washiness,
Mhm.
right? I think at different moments, those two guys, I mean, Trump did more to overturn Roe v. Wade than any other president.
Yeah,
You know?
it's crazy. Yeah.
So there's times when if you want to be pro-life, you might end up voting for that wishy-washy person quite pragmatically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what politics is, right? So I think when I look at someone who's founding a party that's trying to be right on everything and trying to not be compromising on any of this stuff, I've kind of, my heart's not in it already, because I feel like that's just that. What political project are they really doing? Is this actually going to be worthwhile at any level? You know? And it comes into the whole idea of like, why are we in a two-party system and why don't third parties ever work? And the major argument for us being in a two-party system is that we don't have proportional representation, right? In most systems, if you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of parliament. In our system, if you get 51% of the vote, you get 100% of the seat. Mm-hmm. And that has always, in a sense, created it as two major parties, because one wins everything. Yeah. You know, so there's only two people in the competing realm. And I think there is maybe room for a third party. Like, I think the Green Party and the Libertarian Party have been interesting. The Green Party essentially is a constituency. And if they can get the Democrats to do what they want, they don't run anyone. They just throw in with the Democrats, right? And the Libertarians, in many ways, have been a very successful third party that have consistently gotten like 3%, 2%, 4% of the vote. Mm-hmm. And frankly, if they had a real chance of winning, they'd even get more. But they do a bad job of like, I mean, most of these elections are decided by 3-4%. Mm-hmm. So if they could ever barter their votes for freedom, they would have a lot more impact. Like if they'd say, hey, we will all vote Republican or we'll all vote Democrat if you give us these policy concessions, right? They'd get a lot more freedom achieved that way than always getting 3% of the vote and never winning anything, you know? Yeah. So I'd be cool with this American Solidarity Party or with a Catholic politician if the idea was I'm building up a constituency that will end up transforming one of the major parties. As a third party, I don't see the point.
Yeah. So I've voted for the American Solidarity Party, but I'm in like a very blue state. and I think I would feel a bigger responsibility if I didn't think the outcome, you know, of my vote for president was so predetermined. But they do have people running in local elections and very local elections.
I guess I don't understand, like, a local election can have influence on your locals, and that's cool. But if there's like 100,000 local positions nationwide and they get 5, I don't know why I'm giving a lot of energy to that party. You know? Or like, I mean, maybe I would if in my local thing it mattered. But I think right now what we're seeing is the federal government has kind of gotten so much power, which it probably shouldn't have, that even if you do everything right in your locale, you can kind of still get messed up. Through immigration, through inflation, through a bunch of different things that can kind of happen nationally. You could run your town right and still end up with a bunch of problems. But yeah, I am for local. I think I've made this point in the podcast before. I'm all for the local elections. But all right. I think this kind of goes into like how we're thinking about the current state of the world and the elections. And Laura and I are not quite on the same page. But I think, what if I present the ideas, Laura, and you object whenever you want to create more space in there? Is that okay?
All right, sure.
All right. I think we should appreciate how successful the U.S. has been for 200 years, more than 200 years. I think it's one of the greatest success stories of government ever, you know, and we can hate on it all you want, but whatever. I mean, just objectively, I think it measured up as a great government. And I think that government was an Enlightenment government, like it believed in private property, freedom of speech, like individual rights, things like that. Also believed in a secular space for discussion. It was a secular government or an Enlightenment government with a Christian society, right? And Protestant leadership, which I think is funny. And for most of its history, it was Protestant led, you know? And I think that even though it had this great 200 plus year run, it's ran into some real severe problems right now, and we don't know what's going to happen next, right? The secular space, which was a space for sincerely religious people to talk about things and make, decisions, has actually become its own religion. That makes the secular space not function anymore as its original intention, right? The secular space also was like a common denominator, like, hey, we agree on 95% of everything, so let's make some decisions based on that. And the 5% we vehemently disagree on, that'll be up to private choice. That common denominator, 95%, is now way lower. We don't agree on history. We don't agree on what is the science anymore. We don't agree on so much that it's just problematic, right? And the Christianity that was coupled with the Enlightenment government has just been eroded so far, And at the same time, I think in the last 40 years, we've basically abused one class of society, the class of society that always gets abused, which is the less powerful, less economically advantaged, right? And the case there is that if you are either college educated or own assets, then, and by all I mean by own assets, you're not one of the 1%, you're like the top third.
You have
you're
like a house. Yeah.
You got a house, you got a 401k.
Yeah.
Then in the 80s, when we advocated for free trade, like even unilateral free trade with China, great. There's a good economic argument for it, blah, blah, blah. But it basically took jobs away from one fraction of our society while benefiting the owners. So if you had the 401k, you had an ownership stake in the companies that sent the factories overseas, your 401k went up, and all the products at Walmart got cheaper, so your cost of living went down. If you were a worker at the factory, you kind of just lost your job, right? Then we have the immigration. That's basically bringing in unskilled labor, not allowing the blue collar workers to see that increase in the price. To me right now, the only blue collar workers that see a real increase in their income are the ones who are like licensed. But now the gray market of illegal plumbers and illegal electricians and everybody is just so massive that even they're, not going to see all the return, So all the immigration hurts that segment of society, whereas the upper part of society, well, our food got cheaper because we have immigrants picking it. We now have home cleaners and other people doing jobs at a cheaper rate than if we had to hire Americans to do those jobs. We have all these foreigners working in all our nursing homes. And it doesn't have to be this way. Like if you go to Japan, the person who cleans your hotel room is a Japanese person. And the person who works at the old folks home is a Japanese person. It's not an immigrant, Yeah. That's just a different vision for how to proceed,
Yeah.
And then we had the subsidized interest rates followed by the inflation. The only people who could get the loans at the very subsidized 3% rates or 0%, were big corporations, were wealthy people in the top of their society. They could get bigger homes, et cetera, et cetera. So they were being subsidized in their purchase of assets. The wage earners and renters were not getting that money. And then the inflation hit. That brought up the 401ks, brought up all the assets, brought up all the home values. So the top third were doing fine and the lower third were getting hosed. Their cost of living is going dramatically up and their wages aren't. Right. So that has kind of put us in a bad crux position, as a country, I think. And what's made it a dangerous position is that both parties, like 3-4 months ago, I wasn't very worried because I thought if Trump gets elected, I don't think he can do meaningful change because there's no Congress that'll be with him. Right. And if the establishment, Kamala or Biden, gets elected, it doesn't matter to me either because it's just going to be more of the same, which won't fix anything, but also just keep on.
We've been living with it.
Yeah, we've been living with it, right? It's known evil. And that it's going to take a bigger crisis for us to have real change. Something worse is going to have to happen that makes a wave of new congressmen with an administration come in, and then maybe we could really set things on a better path, right? But everyone complains about rhetoric and division, and I'm not against division. Like if you got two people with good ideas fighting and they're fighting hard for them on each side and they disagree, fine. And even if they don't like each other, fine. We're kind of at a point, though, where the establishment kind of thinks that this is their last gasp. Like if someone else wins, it's not clear that they won't be gutted, which might be a good thing. And the Republicans are kind of, at least the MAGA Republicans are kind of seeing it as like, if we don't win now, we never will, because immigration and illegal immigration, and which affects both like the number of congressional seats you get, and if they allow illegal immigrants to vote or even do voter fraud type stuff, they're just never going to win again. Mm-hmm. So now everyone just became way more desperate, which makes everything dangerous. What are your thoughts on that, Laura?
I think maybe the disagreement we have maybe is like on the threat assessment. But I think I have been surprised to hear how much people on both sides think that the other candidate is a threat to democracy. I have a friend who said, if I'm quoting this correctly, that when he was growing up, his dad used to say, like, well, the reason we live in America is because when we have elections here, people don't die. And I think that's kind of like, that's what you're talking about.
Oh, that violence could happen after the election?
Well, I mean that when you talk about danger, you're kind of talking about the basic democracy, upholding basic democratic ideals, Enlightenment views.
I kind of want to tackle this problem by talking about like, what does an upside camel look like, and what does a downside one, and what does an upside Trump look like? What does a downside one look like? But yeah, let's do that real quick, because I think that might like answer this idea or this problem. So a downside Kamala is pretty bad. It's like she could pack the Supreme Court. They could do a lot more immigration stuff that like basically does make it so Republicans never win. And whatever the kind of base level corruption we have, which when I say base level corruption, I mean like enormous deficit spending that goes to foreign wars that we never win and causes massive inflation. That is like we can all talk about taxes, right? Are we going to tax capital gains or property tax or income tax? Are we going to tax the rich, the middle class, or the poor, right? We can talk about that all you want. But if you have a budget deficit, you're just funding it by inflation, not by taxes. Yeah. Right. Which is just a tax by itself. And it is cruel to the poor. Yeah. And they are just doing that every year. And it's like a shell game when they're talking about actual tax policy, because they're just using inflation, Yeah. So I think if Kamala does kind of downside the worst version of herself, then I do think we could end up with violence from the right, because they will feel completely disenfranchised as if they could never win again. And it only takes 1% of them to be that way. Right. Upside Kamala would just be Biden 2.0, and it would just be the same thing they've been doing, not packing the Supreme Court. They still would be doing excess immigration. I am very perturbed that Dick Cheney came out and endorsed Kamala, because I think one of the big evils is the neocon stuff, the like promotion of the foreign wars. And Dick Cheney is the greatest abuser of this in history, I think. So if people who weren't paying attention or are too young to know, he's the vice president under George Bush. He was there when we started Afghanistan and Iraq wars, right? He also simultaneously was the major owner of Halliburton, right? Which got no bid contracts in those wars. Yep. They were feeding our troops, and they were doing the services end of the Iraq war with no bid contracts. They did not open those up for competition, and he incredibly profiteered off that. And when you saw even the price of food they were serving to the soldiers in Iraq, Ruth Chris Steakhouse could have served those dinners. Yeah. The profit margin was incredible. Okay. Just research Halliburton no bid contracts. You'll see the history of that situation. And so whenever Dick Cheney is for a candidate, it sounds like we're going to have more foreign wars, and on the Trump side, it's like, what's upside Trump? Upside Trump would be a major reform of a few bureaucracies, probably with the help of either Vivek or RFK Jr. Yeah, I think Tulsi
it would
Gabbard.
Be if he surrounds himself with the right people. Yeah,
he's already said
like,
he wants to have an anti-government waste commission held by Elon Musk, which I think the level of government waste is epic at this point, like to the point we can't look at it because it's so embarrassing. Like the 40, like we covered last time, that 40 to $80 million a week in cash goes to the Taliban. Like we just need to stop that, for example, but like that'd be upside Trump. That could cause, like, the left already has its own violence, you know, the riots of 2020. Biden veiledly said, hey, if I get elected, these riots will stop. They have their own henchmen in a way, right? The right's henchmen, you could point to January 6th, but that wasn't that bad compared to what it could be. It could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention lawfare. Like a continued corruption of the government going after your political opponents could happen under Kamala or under Trump. But I don't know. So, and then downside Trump is that within 2 months of being elected, he fires RFK Jr., Tulsi, Elon, and because they
which happened in when he was president. A lot of people signed up and dropped out pretty quick.
Right. And I think we know more who he is now, but you also just don't put it past him, right? And we also know that he can kind of get played, and he doesn't seem like the most emotionally stable person in the world, which I hate having him in charge of nuclear weapons as that. Not that I think Kamala is, but do you know who else endorsed Kamala? Putin. Putin said, I'm for Biden. So if Biden wants me to vote for Kamala, I'll vote for Kamala.
Oh my
so Dick Cheney and Putin have both endorsed Kamala. So
is he trolling? What is he doing?
There's a little bit of troll, but I also think he's saying it would be in our best interest if Kamala won.
Wow.
Because I think he just wants to weaken the U.S., but I don't know. But boy, that's dark. The thing that got dark to me is I think that Elon Musk took a pretty big personal risk by coming out for Trump. And I think RFK Jr. paid a big personal cost by coming out for Trump.
Yeah.
To the point he was kind of choked up when he was doing it because he realized his whole family hates what he's doing. His own wife doesn't really like what he's doing.
I mean, they've been hating what he's been doing, but yeah.
I know, but it's...
I know. It is. Yeah.
And I think if, Elon Musk could be thrown in prison next year for the exact same thing that Pavlov Durov was thrown in prison in France for, allowing things on his platform that are illegal, Yeah. Gmail has a lot of illegal things happen on their platform, but they cooperate so they don't get persecuted. But so all that's real dark, man. And I think that's why, although 3 or 4 months ago, I didn't care because I thought things had to get worse before they got better. Now I'm like looking at how much worse they could get, and I'm worried.
Yeah.
So what I like about what we just did is I hope we just threw you out some reasoning, and you should disagree with any part you want to, which you should, and choose accordingly.
I think you and I put different percentages on things staying the same depending who wins. That's interesting.
What we really need that neither side is looks like they would be willing to do is you need to win, get your way, and make friends with your enemies. You need to both say, hey, here's the most important thing. Sorry you lost. We're going to just do this. Yeah. And then give your enemies a way forward because you have to have a relationship with them.
Yeah, I think that was why I liked, even though maybe his platform wasn't perfect, that's why I liked RFK Jr. so much, is because he was the first politician talking like that for a long, long time, Right. And I think he meant it,
So here's kind of let's now kind of turn the page a little bit because there's a possibility of political violence after this election in the next so many years. And it's probably higher than most of us are ready for or have thought about, And let's talk about the nature of that for a second. In the case of Islamic fundamentalism, there are very few Islamic people willing to join Al-Qaeda. It's not 1 in 100. It's less than 1 in 100, right? But there's enough that Al-Qaeda fills out the ranks. In fact, they're way bigger now than they were at 9/11. And there's even a bigger percentage that's willing to silently clap for them, maybe there's a bigger percentage who even gives money to them and funds it. And there's even another percentage that silently claps, Yeah. And that's when the number starts getting bigger, right? And I think when you look at the left and the right here in the US, it's a very small percentage on each side willing to go to violence. But there's another percentage that says, well, you kind of had it coming.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And you saw that with Antifa. You saw that in the 2020 riots where violence was happening. And there was a decent group of people who didn't care or thought it was justified or like just was not for coming down on those people. Right. And the same is going to be true of future violence also. There'll be a small number with a larger number who's sympathetic. Right. Yeah. And historically, that's what causes great political instability is a small number of people with sympathy who then recruit or conscript larger numbers. Okay. So that's kind of the danger I think we're facing. Right. And the question is, will it just be I consider the 2020 thing to be pretty massive. Like we had riots in almost every major city.
And I mean, in DC, they lasted for a long time.
And then there's this lasting effect that all the major police forces in our major cities are demoralized and now understaffed. No one wants to join them. We have this ongoing problem from that violence, right?
Yeah.
Crime in all the major cities is up. Okay. What does the next level violence look like? Is it something that actually uproots your life or not? I mean, not that the last version didn't. I know people who have moved away from cities due to it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a big resource allocation change due to a political problem, you know. My take is like this. I think that there's kind of three versions of the world that are possible in the future. One is the current version. Everything keeps puttering along the way it is. And I call that the okay to good version. I don't see anything better than that happening. You know, another one is we deteriorate and become a lot more like a Latin American regime where things kind of suck. I call that the sucky version. And then the last version is a terrible version that I don't know how to describe.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you have to have some probability of each version happening. I don't think it's certain that any version will happen, but you have to have some like what we call in Bayesian statistics, like a prior. You have to have this like prior expectation, you know, and then whether or not Trump or Kamala wins kind of changes your expectation of what's going to happen in the future. Right. The thing I want to kind of point out that I think is reasonable for every family and every individual to think about is think about fire insurance on your house. There is I think this number's too high, but there's a 0.25% each year that you will have a house fire. Maybe not a terrible one. Maybe it could be just destroy the kitchen or something, but that's like 1 in 400 houses has a house fire every year. That's the highest percentage I found on the internet.
Okay.
Right. And a normal thing that a homeowner pays is like $1,500 to insure against that a year.
A year. Yeah.
Okay. What probability do you put on a terrible future? What probability do you put on a sucky future? And what probability do you put on the, you know, good to keep things normal future? Right. And if your probability, and by the way, if there's a probability of 0.25 a year for the house fire over 10 years, the probability is closer to 2 or 3% that you have a house fire in the next 10 years. Right. Same with this terrible future. Right. If the probability is 1% it happens next year, or even 0.5% over the next 10 years, the probability gets way higher, like closer to 10 if it's 1% a year. Let me put the cap on this idea. The cap on this idea is if you pay $1,500 a year to insure against house fire, shouldn't you allocate a few resources to insure against a terrible future? And I don't know what that looks like, but it could be a little bit of planning. It could be a little bit of money. It could be whatever. I think that's rational.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much to say. I think I put a very high percentage on things staying the same, getting slightly worse, maybe, but yeah.
The question is like, what's a high percentage?
Right. Because, I know. Because
even if it's
you're
95%,
saying the house fire is very low.
Right. Like even if you put if you put the same probability as a house fire, 0.25% as the terrible outcome, and you're already putting $1,500 to insure against that, and most people would, even if they weren't made to by their mortgage company. What do you want to put on the 0.25% that America has a big violent problem in the next 10 years? You know, I think that we're all kind of biased by, maybe it's a Rene Girard mimetic desire that like we kind of look at what everyone's doing and you figure that's probably the optimal strategy, and you might differ from it a little bit, but you kind of go with everyone, you know. Or you kind of think like the herd is most likely the right way anyway. You know, kind of mimetic desire and a herd mentality are kind of
I mean,
same.
We know the herd is not, but that's operating.
The problem is like, if you start looking at historical conflicts like the French Revolution, France was very wealthy when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they didn't have just the worst government in the world when it happened, you know? So it's just like, I don't know, you know, but then I also have hope because like Argentina's fallen apart twice and it just got sucky, but it didn't get that. I don't know. They didn't get into civil war or anything. Yeah. So that's kind of hopeful that things can get quite bad without going to civil war. But
yeah,
I don't know. I'm trying not to be a doomer because I just think that it's worth having a plan.
Yeah.
Now let's all be very happy.
Should we talk about lawnmowers and getting your child a broken lawnmower? Introduce
this subject, please. We're switching gears because that gear ran us into the ground. All right, where are we going now?
I have a son that wants to be a mechanic. He's 6, so obviously this is very set in stone. And I was, you know, as one does, just thinking about what a future for a mechanic might look like. And Clark was saying that he kind of likes, we have a couple friends that did like a very like a liberal arts education while learning a little bit of a trade on the side.
We had 2 friends who, they both are philosophy PhDs now, but they both had like student work stuff. And one of them was repairing campus vehicles, doing mechanic work. And the other one was doing electrical work on campus. And then when they came to Simple House and volunteered, it was like, oh, you can do electrical work?
Yeah.
It was great. It's like, you're not just a philosopher?
Yeah.
But
yes. Yeah.
Hey, Laura, when you were in middle school, did you take a shop class?
Yes,
like
I did.
Wood shop?
Yes,
and you took a metal shop?
No, I did not. Not metal shop.
Okay. I went to public school, right? And I had metal shop and I had.
When we had
you
home
went to public school, middle school?
Yeah. We had home ec and we had shop. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had home ec shop and metal shop and wood shop. We had both, right?
Uh-huh.
And my kids are asking me things like, Dad, how do you make like plastic figurines? Like, these are the questions my kids ask, right? And they're like 11, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you got to have a mold and you got to do this. And I once did this in metal shop where we poured, he's like, what's the mold made out of? Well, in metal shop, we made it out of like compacted dirt and we poured the molten you know, and it was like, and I'm looking at him and he's not too far from 7th grade or whatever. When I did it, I'm like thinking, you're never going to get to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and this is kind of crazy and not great, you know? And like, if I was to run a shop class now, like, which I would be excited to do if a Catholic high school told me to, we would not be pouring molten metal into forms. We'd like take a toilet and take it apart and say, now rebuild the toilet. Oh, you got a leak, redo it, you know?
Yeah.
And so you and I were talking about like, go get your kid a broken lawnmower and then go get him what at Home Depot is called a mechanic tool set. These were $100 years ago, so I don't know how much inflation affected them now. But it's very useful to have one of these in your house. It has like every socket you ever want, every Allen key you ever want, all the basic wrenches, you know, and just have them take apart that lawnmower, that broken lawnmower, just to see an internal combustion engine and a carburetor and all that.
Yep.
You know?
And you said that the carburetors are the number one thing that messes up in a lawnmower.
Oh, I know people who literally have legit side hustles where all they do is buy broken lawnmowers, like clean the carburetor and resell them.
Wow. Okay. Modern cars don't have carburetors now, do they?
No, I think fuel injection replaces carburetors. Yeah. Carburetors are a place where the kind of the air and I don't know. I'm talking a little bit past my expertise right now. I didn't get raised this way.
Yeah.
I've taken a carburetor apart, but
yeah.
It's the thing that dumps a fuel into the piston. It has like a toilet bowl float inside and everything. And the tractor I took apart. But all right. Yeah, broken lawnmowers for your kids.
Interesting project for your kid. It takes up less space than a car. So.
And then you're just going to throw it away when they're done. You're going to recycle it. But just get them a broken lawnmower.
I mean, I bet especially where I live, where people do not fix a lot of things. You could get could that be a little side hustle a kid could have? Just find broken lawnmowers on Craigslist and Marketplace, and
weed eaters too.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And use YouTube videos and figure it out.
Yeah.
I still have this idea though, that like at these, like all these new classical high schools and everything, there should be like a practicum class. I've also had this idea, besides fixing toilets and stuff and probably rebuilding carburetors, you should do your taxes.
Isn't there like a Catholic trade school? Didn't somebody open that or starting that?
It's all at the college level though.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of them now. There's one in Steubenville, but there's one that a friend of ours told us about in Ann Arbor that looks really good.
Great.
All right. Okay. Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast. I hope that wasn't too dour for you. That's our 10 cents on the upcoming election. Hopefully nothing new happens that makes us do another episode on this.
Yeah. All right. See you later, Clark.
God bless you. Talk to you later. Thank you, everybody.
You too. Goodbye.